for T-low, I never want to change more than 0.1 at a time, and I always want to check an expiratory hold before and after I make a change. Just be safe with that button, because you can lose all your peak, and that's not a good thing, especially with the real sick patient. Okay, any questions so far? Is everybody good with that? Now, just a real quick thought process here. When you guys take a patient from the oscillator to conventional ventilation, you do that fairly routinely. Does the patient do well all the time?
Not all the time.
No, you're smiling, so I know the answer. Not all. Let's think about that. Why do we think that the patient doesn't always do well? I mean, obviously there's a lot of reasons why, but probably one of the big reasons why, if we take a patient from the oscillator who has a high mean airway pressure, and we put that patient in conventional, and maybe they don't have a high mean airway pressure in conventional, you know, we're dropping that patient's mean airway pressure. Sometimes the patient's just not ready for that drop in mean airway pressure. If you take a patient on the oscillator and they have a mean airway pressure of 22, and you put them in conventional and the mean airway pressure is 12, well, probably, unless if they're just in great shape, probably they're not going to be ready for that change. They may end up decompensating. They may not do it right away. They may do it right away. But, you know, they may decompensate over time because they're just not ready for that huge drop in mean airway pressure. The same can be said for bivent to conventional. You know, if you're going to go from bivent to conventional, probably a good idea is to look at this mean airway pressure before you switch to PRVC or pressure control or whatever other mode that you're looking at, because if you go from 23 and you put the patient just in, you know, pressure control, you know, with kind of normal settings here, you know, you're going to take this patient, you know, significantly down in their mean airway pressure. The patient may not be ready for the drop that you end up doing to them. I mean, this patient's going to go right now from 23 to 12, so that's going to be a big drop. So my advice to avoid that, you know, really and truly, when you think about a way to really overcome that, is you can kind of start a weaning process in bivent. And probably the easiest method, or the most described method that you'll hear or see about, is the drop and stretch. You know, you'll see that in papers written, that sort of thing. And the drop refers to the P high. So I'm going to start dropping the P high, and the stretch refers to the T high. I'm going to start stretching the T high out. Now, it's easy to remember the drop and stretch, but let's think about why we're going to do both of those things. First of all, with the P high, I'm going to drop that because hopefully my patient's going to, as they improve, they're going to need less and less mean airway pressure. So I can start dropping my P high. I'm not going to go crazy and drop it 5 centimeters at a time, but I'm going to, you know, drop it 1 to 2 centimeters over a course of time. In fact, I can say this for sure. You know, there's been times when a patient's done real well, and I've dropped 6 to 8 centimeters over the course of a day, just kind of rapidly weaning, you know, but I've never dropped it hugely all at once. So we can start dropping the P high down, you know, dropping that down, and the stretch with the T high, as I stretch my T high out, what starts to happen to my number of releases? They start going down, right? Because as the patient improves, hopefully, they're going to be spontaneously breathing more and more and more. So I can start stretching this patient out. And you know, one of my biggest, I guess, watermarks, if you will, is if I'm going to switch a patient to conventional, and you can extubate from bivent. Most children's hospitals, I'm just going to be honest, they don't follow that path. But you know, if you're going to switch a patient to conventional, it's probably a good idea to at least have that mean airway pressure in the teens. I mean, you know, because you can kind of match up some mean airway pressure in the teens, and you know that may necessitate you get this P high down into the, you know, somewhere between the 15 and 20 centimeter range, just so that your mean starts to drop down. But you really want to have that mean at a value that you can at least somewhat mimic in conventional, and it's not such a big drop off the cliff whenever you go into conventional ventilation. But that's the drop and stretch method, just dropping that P high down, stretching that T high out. And let's face it, if you have a patient who's not spontaneously breathing, but you know they're doing great from the oxygen side, don't stretch, just drop. You know, just start dropping the P high, give the patient some mean airway pressure. You know, if you're still having a little problem with the PaCO2, don't stretch, you know, at that particular point. That's okay, because, you know, the goal is right at the moment is You're just trying to drop that P high down to get your mean airway pressure to an acceptable value that you can go to more conventional ventilation. Now, questions, thoughts, issues, concerns? Did that help?
It did help. What value would give me a certain respiratory rate?
Well, depending on where I have these two, my T high and T peak, that's going to give me a certain respiratory rate, because that'll have my release rate here.
Okay.
You know, the other thing, one thing to think about respiratory rate too, you know, I go to a lot of places and I say, hey, you know, you had this patient on Bivent yesterday and now they're not. Why? Well, the patient didn't do well. You know, and one of the number one reasons why they say a patient didn't do well is they say that the patient was tachypnic. You know, and I hear that pretty routinely. Well, number one, a Bivent patient that's tachypnic is a good patient. You know, I love tachypnic Bivent patients. The apneic Bivent patient is the one I don't like nearly as much. So, you know, just kind of think about this. Whenever you're talking about the rate here, the rate is a product of your release rate plus whatever the patient's breathing. So, you know, if you have a release rate, you know, especially in the NICU, say set at 20, you know, and the patient's add another 20 breaths, you know, that's going to end up with a rate of 40. That doesn't mean the patient's breathing 40. That's just a product of the releases and the actual patient effort there. So just kind of keep that in mind, you know, whenever, because the physicians sometimes see that number and they'll say, whoa, 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 they're breathing 40 times a minute. And you say, well, they're breathing only 30, but we have the releases set at 10. So really those other 10's not really counting in the actual respiratory rate. But they'll look at that number and they'll quickly say, no, patient's not tolerating it. But just tolerate those higher respiratory rates a little bit more in Bivent than you would conventional. Because if we think about this, this is very similar to oscillatory ventilation where the patient's actually providing the oscillation, you know, here through spontaneous effort. So, you know, a rapid spontaneous effort is not a terrible thing. Anything else? You good?
I'm good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
No.